Hey guys, welcome to Unit 6 review, and we're going to start with the rise of American imperialism. Until the 1890s, the US began to practice some of the same imperialistic ideals as the European powers. Reasons for American imperialism. There are many reasons for American imperialism. One reason is expansion. America became an important industry power, which meant we needed new markets and more raw materials, and to get these things, they needed to imperialize. Another reason is that American missionaries felt that it was their duty to Christianize quote-unquote heathens. The concept of social Darwinism was also used by supporters of imperialism, which ties to Anglo-Saxonism, the belief that the white race was superior, and these things encouraged imperialism. We also have The White Man's Burden. It was a poem written by Rudyard Kipling. It explained that it was their duty to civilize the inferior races of Africa and Asia, and was to justify their imperialistic practices. Captain Alfred T. Mahan was the main supporter of naval expansion and was also a supporter of imperialism. He created the book The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. He said that by expanding the nation and making it stronger, it will make the nation stronger. And it made an excuse to have a strong navy and encourage imperialism. We also have Hawaii. America was interested in Hawaii's sugar plantations. The U.S. government provided generous terms to Hawaiian sugar growers. Queen Liliuokalani became queen after Queen Kalakaua died in 1891. Americans found this as an economic advantage of being able to take over Hawaii. Businessmen, mostly Americans, in Hawaii wanted to overthrow the government, so they created the group Committee of Safety. It was to protect the Americans in Hawaii, but was really meant to conquer the government. U.S. Marines were called in when they felt that they were threatened, and in 1893, pro-American sugar planters, assisted by American Marines, overthrew the Queen and requested Hawaii to be annexed by the U.S. President Cleveland was opposed to the annexation. However, in the election of 1896, President McKinley used the idea of manifest destiny as the reason why the U.S. should not control Hawaii. Soon after, the annexation was approved by Congress.
America, protector or oppressor? The Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War began in 1898 against the Spanish and America over Cuba. Spanish sent a huge force of 150,000 troops and instituted a policy of reconcentration. President McKinley agreed to intervene with Cuba because Spain did not agree fully with the list of demands the Spanish want. Theodore Roosevelt was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy who cabled all of the commanders in the Pacific to be ready for immediate combat against the Spanish. To continue on, American public opinion began to swerve towards intervention in Cuba. Yellow journalism was practiced when dealing the events in Cuba. What yellow journalism is are accounts and illustrations of lurid and sensational events to sell papers. This was significant because this covered the events in Cuba leading up to the Spanish-American War and shifted American opinion toward desiring war with Spain. And as a result of these stories, jingoism was developed in America, which was an American foreign policy based on a rough nationalism, a firm belief in American world superiority. The results of the Spanish-American War is when the American Navy, led by Admiral Dewey, destroyed the Spanish fleet in the Pacific and the entire Spanish Atlantic force, which then led Spain to forfeit and let them sign the Treaty of Paris to end the war for now. And what the Treaty of Paris did is Spain recognized the independence of Cuba with the payment of $20 million, and also they gave up the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam over to the U.S., giving them supreme power over the Pacific.
The Teller Amendment. It was created to assure America would not annex Cuba under any circumstances. After victory over Spanish, America didn't want Cuba to be entirely free, so they created the Platt Amendment, which was created after the war. It stated that Cuba could not enter into any agreements with other countries without their approval of the U.S. The U.S. had the right to interfere with Cuban affairs, and the U.S. would be given to naval bases on Cuban mainland.
The USS Maine is an American ship sent to the Havana harbor in early 1898 to protect American interests in a period of increased tension between Spanish troops and native Cubans. All of a sudden, the USS Maine exploded on February 15, 1898, that killed nearly 275 sailors. During the same month, the Delome letter was stolen from the Spanish ambassador to Washington, in which he called President McKinley Week, which was published in newspapers across the country. The debate over the Philippines is when the Filipinos were upset about America not giving up the Philippines and independence to them after they threw out the Spanish. The Anti-Imperialist League was formed in 1898 to stop American annexation in the Philippines. And despite the arguments of letting the Filipinos controlling the Philippines or not, President McKinley supported American control of the Philippines due to the Filipinos being simply unfit for self-government. And this led to attacks of Filipino rebels against the Americans, killing many Filipinos and Americans combined. The Panama Canal. The Panama Canal is a canal that linked between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans for faster trading and quicker routes for ships to pass. The French and Colombians declined the offer of the U.S. building the Panama Canal due to it being their land. So TR did was he used his big stick diplomacy against the Colombians, which led to a small revolt by the French. The revolt stopped by giving America their independence toward the country, which led the U.S. to build the canal. After they built the canal, there was a significance to it because it helped import and export goods faster than before. It led to faster traveling to certain areas for the American Navy for military action, and it was harder for them to be targeted by pirates. The Roosevelt Corollary and Dollar Diplomacy. So the Roosevelt Corollary is basically TR's basic, big stick diplomacy for intervening in the affairs of nations, and the dollar diplomacy. And the Roosevelt Corollary. The significance of the Roosevelt Corollary because it helped TR intervene with other countries if they don't agree with him or not. The dollar diplomacy is a policy by Taft which favored and increased American investment for it to increase American influence and stability. And the significance of that because it gave the U.S. the right and obligation to save and intervene any politically and financially unstable condition without any military action.
The progressive legacy of Woodrow Wilson. Presidency under Woodrow Wilson. Under Woodrow Wilson, he created the Underwood Tariff Act of 1913, which cut tariffs on imported goods. He also created the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914. It was a continuation of Sherman Antitrust Act and outlawed certain specific business practices, and helped labor movement by making strikes and other labor activities legal. Federal Trade Commission, its main job was to uniformly enforce the antitrust laws. And he also created the Federal Reserve Act, which established 12 district reserve banks and the creation of Federal Reserve Notes. This system was designed to protect the American economy against further panics and made things more organized.
Which brings us to the Progressive Era that lasted from 1890 through 1920. The Progressive Era was a reaction towards the Gilded Age because it was a response to the dark period of greed and corruption during the economic growth. At this time, women played a big part during the Progressive Era because it, in numerous numbers, added social justice to suffrage. According to the members of the social gospel movement, the government's responsibility is to improve the working conditions of America. The social gospel instilled the elements of Christianity, and it was strictly a Protestant movement. Muckrakers was a name given under the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt because they exposed the corruption in American society through editorials, books, and magazines. For example, Ida Tarbell wrote the history of Standard Oil Company and emphasized upon the corruption of what she discovered in the oil companies. Another example is Upton Sinclair with The Jungle. He had unmasked the horrific images within the meat industry and publicized it as a bad image that had left many civilians speechless. This led to the creation of the Pure Food and Drug Act and Meat Inspection Act. Progressives at the state level is the introduction of reforms in states that allowed citizens to have a more direct role in the political process. One of these main things was the 17th Amendment, established at 1913, which gave voters the initiative to directly elect U.S. senators in place of the state legislators, which followed under the initiative process, referendum process, and recall process. These limited the power of the government by giving the people voting rights.
Women in Progressivism. In 1899, Florence Kelley founded the National Consumers League, which was an organization made up of women who lobbied at the state and national levels for legislation. that would protect both women and children at their home and their workplace. Women played a critical role in the creation of settlement houses, which are centers made up by the Progressive Era reformers in the poorest sections in the American cities. Jane Addams founded the Whole House in Chicago that became a model for settlement houses. Women even joined organizations such as the Anti-Saloon League, whose members felt that alcohol was a major cause for the misery of their lower classes, and the National American Women's Suffrage Association, led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Suzanne B. Anthony, to fight for suffrage and rights. National Woman Party, which was founded by Alice Paul to get an equal right from women to add to the Constitution. Reforming the workplace. Horrible events such as the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire that took place in March 1911 in New York trapped and killed about 150 young women in the factory. This led to many factory reforms, including increasing safety precautions for workers. This then convinced many progressives to push for safety and health conditions in factories.
Which brings us to the square deal under Teddy Roosevelt. It was the highest point in the progressive movement because it guaranteed all Americans would get an equal opportunity from the government. It emphasized on the 3 C's, being control of corporation, which was the response to the high demands of the working class. This also put the regulation of railroads and introduced the Interstate Commerce Act, which designed a further regulation of interstate shippers. And this also gave the name to TR as the trustbuster, being that the Sherman Antitrust Act was enforced under TR on a regular basis, and it actually made something happen by breaking bad trust. The consumer protection, for example, was upon Upton Sinclair the Jungo. Response was the push for the agreement upon Congress to pass the Meat Inspection and Pure Food and Drug Act. The third was the conservation of nature, which said that natural resources was specified as limitless. Even though many laws had been involved during the prevention for the destruction of natural resources, they were really never enforced. And this led TR to the passing of Newlands Act of 1902 and the U.S. Forest Service, which provided for public lands.
This then led to progressivism under William Hooker Taft. In 1908 presidential elections, William Henry Taft was Teddy Roosevelt's hand-picked successor, who promised to follow TR's progressive legacy, but didn't actually follow the progressive ways. Taft supported the Payne-Hallrich Tariff Act in 1909, which angered progressives because it showed tariffs hurting the lower class. The Ballinger-Pitch Show affair, which allowed private businessmen to purchase large amounts of public land in Alaska.
Which brings us to the election of 1912. TR decided to run for another term because he felt that President Taft was not progressive enough, being that the new nationalism was progressive reforms by TR to explain how businesses needed to be regulated, that neither of his opponents were committed to conservation. But even under this, Taft won 1912 nomination because he controlled most of the Republican Party machinery and caused the development of the Bull Moose Party to split the Republican Party and votes for the election. This split allowed Democrat Wilson to win the election of 1912, which brings us to our end of our review session.